Chosen one, stop scrolling right now. This is not background noise, not entertainment, and not an algorithmic coincidence. This is a God's message, arriving in exact divine alignment, and it reached you because something within you was already awake enough to recognize it. Before logic could interrupt, before doubt could speak, your spirit leaned forward. That pause you felt, that subtle inner stillness where your attention stopped instead of moving on, was not curiosity. It was recognition, and recognition always comes before understanding. You are not here by accident. You were called, and this video is about why you've never been able to fit in, what has been awakening inside you, and why your life has unfolded the way it has. Listen carefully, because this message will not repeat itself in the same way again. What you are about to hear will explain why the discomfort followed you, why belonging always felt conditional, and why forcing yourself to adapt never brought peace. This is not motivation. This is revelation. If you stay until the end, you will understand why your difference was necessary, why the resistance was real, and why this moment is not random but timed. If this message feels unusually personal, that is because it was never meant to reach everyone. It was designed to find the chosen one who has carried a lifelong question without language for it. The one who has walked through rooms full of people, yet felt unseen. The one who followed the rules, met expectations, and still felt misaligned. The one who kept asking quietly and repeatedly, "Why don't I fit in anywhere?" That feeling did not come from weakness. It did not come from failure. It came from awareness. It came from spiritual awakening that began long before you had words for it. You sensed truth beneath surface conversations. You noticed what others ignored. You felt the weight of pretending and the exhaustion of trying to belong where your soul felt constricted. This video exists to reveal why that feeling never left, why it was never meant to, and what it has been preparing you for. Stay with this, because by the end you will no longer see your past as confusion or rejection. You will see it as calling. From an early age, you sensed it. You saw things others ignored. You felt things others brushed off. You asked questions that made people uncomfortable, not because you wanted to challenge them, but because truth mattered to you more than approval. You tried to adapt. You tried to blend. You tried to be smaller, quieter, more agreeable, more like what was expected. And still, the feeling followed you. Still, something felt off. That is because not fitting in was never your flaw. It was your signal. This is where the story changes. What you have called alienation is actually initiation. What you labeled as social failure is evidence of divine calling. You were never meant to dissolve into the crowd. You were meant to remain awake within it. And awakened souls cannot fully belong to systems built on sleep. That is not arrogance. That is design. If you feel aligned with what you are hearing, comment 777 now, not for the algorithm. For alignment, for acknowledgement, for yourself. The chosen one always recognizes the truth before they can explain it. You felt different before you had words. You felt the war before you understood why there was resistance. You felt the weight of expectation, the pressure to conform, the subtle rejection that came from simply being yourself. And over time, that constant friction became exhausting. You questioned yourself. You wondered if you were broken. You wondered if something was wrong with you. This message is here to end that confusion. You did not imagine the tension. You did not invent the struggle. The war you felt was real. Light attracts resistance simply by existing. Your presence challenged environments that depended on sameness. Your questions disturbed structures built on silence. Your sensitivity threatened spaces that survived by numbing themselves. So life pushed back, not to stop you but to shape you. This is a God's message, and it is saying this clearly: you were not rejected by life, you were redirected by it. Every time you tried to fit in and failed, something higher intervened. Not to punish you, but to protect the integrity of who you are. A chosen one who fits in everywhere loses the clarity required to fulfill their divine calling. You were preserved through separation. There is a quiet knowing inside you that has never left, even on your worst days. Even when you doubted yourself, even when you tried to give up on being different, that knowing whispered, "There is more truth, more depth, more purpose." That whisper was not imagination. It was spiritual awakening, speaking before your mind was ready to listen. This message will change how you see yourself forever, because it restores the correct frame. You are not behind. You are not strange. You are not too much or not enough. You are precisely tuned. Your nervous system feels overwhelmed because it is sensitive to truth. Your heart feels heavy because it carries awareness. Your mind questions reality because it was never meant to accept surface answers. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to see through. And here is the part you need to hear now. The loneliness you felt was not abandonment. It was refinement. The distance you experienced was not isolation. It was preparation. God does not place awakened souls into deep calling without first teaching them how to stand alone. Because leadership, healing, creation, and truth-bearing all require inner authority. And inner authority is forged when external validation is removed. Circle back to the beginning and hear this again with new ears. This is a message from God. You are not imagining it. You were called. The war is real, and your light is necessary. The world does not need another person who fits in. It needs someone who can see clearly and stand honestly. That is why you are here. That is why this found you. That is why it feels like truth instead of entertainment. If this touched your soul, if something inside you recognized itself without needing proof, comment 111, because you know it. You were called. Why you have always felt out of place, and why it was necessary. This is a message from God, and it is important to say that again before going any further. You are not imagining this feeling. You are not misreading life. You are called, and the discomfort you have carried was part of that calling. The war you felt was real, and your light was never unnecessary. It was disruptive by design. From the beginning, you sensed that something did not align. You could stand in a room full of people and still feel separate. You could follow the rules, meet expectations, and do what was asked, yet feel like you were playing a role instead of living your truth. This sense of not fitting in was not limited to one place or one group. It followed you through friendships, family dynamics, belief systems, education, work, and social identity. No matter how much effort you put in, something always felt slightly off. That feeling has an emotional root and a spiritual one. Emotionally, you learned early how to observe instead of merge. You noticed patterns. You noticed contradictions. You noticed when people said one thing and lived another. Spiritually, your awareness was already active. Your soul was awake enough to feel misalignment before your mind could name it. This is common for the chosen one. Their self-identity forms from inner sensing, not external approval. You often questioned yourself because you assumed belonging was supposed to feel easier. You wondered why others seemed comfortable accepting roles, labels, and traditions that felt restrictive to you. You tried to adapt. You adjusted your voice. You softened your opinions. You hid your depth. You learned how to read the room and become what was acceptable. but the cost was always the same. The more you tried to fit in, the further you drifted from yourself. Here is the truth that changes everything. If you had belonged to everything, your awareness would have been diluted. If you had blended in easily, your perception would have been dulled. Surface-level belonging asks you to agree, to mirror, to conform. Soul-level alignment asks you to remain honest, even when honesty creates distance. Your spirit chose alignment over comfort long before you consciously understood the choice. The loneliness was real. The self-doubt was heavy. The overthinking drained you. You replayed conversations. You questioned your reactions. You wondered if you were too sensitive or too intense. But this was not rejection. This was initiation. Life was not pushing you away. It was pulling you inward. Every moment of separation was teaching you how to hear yourself without noise. Environments built on conformity cannot hold awakened identity. They rely on repetition, hierarchy, and unexamined beliefs to survive. Authenticity threatens those structures, not because authenticity is aggressive, but because it exposes what is false simply by existing. Your discomfort was the signal that your authenticity was trying to emerge. The tension you felt was truth pressing against limitation. Spiritual awakening rarely begins with peace. It begins with friction. It begins with the realization that what works for others does not work for you. It begins with the quiet understanding that your inner world is deeper than the roles available to you. You were never meant to be absorbed into systems that required you to silence your intuition. You were meant to see them clearly, learn from them, and eventually move beyond them. This is why you have always felt out of place. Not because you lacked value, but because your value was specific. Not because you were disconnected, but because you were tuned differently. Your self-identity was forming around truth instead of approval. That process is uncomfortable, isolating, and slow, but it is necessary for those who carry light meant to illuminate rather than blend. Circle back to the beginning, and hear this with clarity. This is a message from God. You are not imagining your experience. You were called into awareness, not comfort. The war you sensed was the resistance light always meets when it enters closed spaces. And your light is necessary, even when it makes others uneasy. You are not broken for feeling this way. You are becoming honest, and honesty is the foundation of every true calling. If this touched your soul, comment 111, because you know it. You were called. The cost of trying to fit in when you set are not meant to. This is a message from God, and it needs to be spoken plainly now. You are not imagining the strain you felt when you tried to fit in. You were called, and the resistance you encountered was real. The war was not in your head. It was happening at the level of identity, and your light was the reason it began. When a chosen one keeps trying to fit in where they were never meant to belong, the cost is not small. It is not temporary discomfort. It is the slow erosion of self-identity. Each time you silenced your truth to be accepted, a fracture formed inside you. Each time you agreed with something that felt wrong just to avoid standing out, your inner clarity dimmed. This is how energetic exhaustion begins. Not from doing too much, but from being too divided. You learned how to perform instead of exist. You learned how to smile while shrinking. You learned how to read expectations and become what was needed in the moment. On the outside, it looked like adaptation. On the inside, it felt like disappearance. This is what emotional masking does to a chosen one. It creates distance from the self, while creating proximity to approval. And approval can never replace alignment. People-pleasing is not kindness when it costs you your truth. It is self-abandonment dressed as harmony. You gave your energy to keep the peace, to maintain connections, to avoid conflict, and yet you felt emptier afterward. That emptiness was not weakness. It was your soul signaling that it was being ignored. The longer this went on, the heavier you felt. Not because life was hard, but because you were carrying versions of yourself that were never meant to survive. Spiritual numbness follows this pattern. When authenticity is repeatedly suppressed, the inner voice grows quiet, not because it disappears, but because it is waiting to be respected again. You may have felt disconnected from meaning, purpose, or direction during these periods. You questioned your divine calling. You wondered if you had imagined it, but numbness is not absence. It is protection. The soul withdraws when it is forced into false alignment. Here is the truth most people never hear. The soul resists what is not true. It resists environments, roles, and relationships that demand distortion. That resistance shows up as discomfort, failure, and repeated inability to blend in. This is not punishment. This is divine correction. God does not allow a chosen one to succeed in spaces that would slowly destroy them. Every time you tried to fit in and something fell apart, it was not because you were inadequate. It was because you were misaligned. Life intervened to redirect you, even when the redirection felt like loss. You may have blamed yourself. You may have thought you were doing something wrong. In reality, something higher was preventing you from settling for less than your authentic path. This is why forcing belonging creates inner fragmentation. One part of you learns to survive socially, while another part waits patiently for truth to be restored. Over time, that split becomes unbearable. Anxiety rises, confusion deepens, exhaustion becomes constant. Not because you are weak, but because you are divided. The chosen one was never meant to live in fragments. Stopping the attempt to fit in is not quitting. It is coming home. It is the moment you choose authenticity over approval, alignment over appearance, and truth over comfort. It feels frightening at first because you are removing masks that once kept you safe. But beneath those masks is coherence. Beneath the effort is peace. Beneath the fear is clarity. This is where self-identity begins to heal. When you stop asking who you need to be to belong and start honoring who you already are. Your divine calling does not require you to blend in. It requires you to be whole, and wholeness is impossible without truth. Circle back to the beginning and hear this clearly. This is a message from God. You were not failing at belonging. You were being guided away from false places. You were called to live in alignment, not imitation. The war you felt was the tension between who you are and who you were pretending to be. And your light is necessary, even when it refuses to fit into small spaces. If this touched your soul, comment 111 because you know it. You were called. The turning point, when you stop trying and start remembering who you are. This is a message from God, and it matters that you hear it again at this exact moment. You are not imagining what is happening inside you. You were called, and the shift you are feeling is real. The war was never meant to last forever. It existed to bring you here, to this turning point where effort gives way to truth, and striving gives way to remembrance. There comes a moment in the life of every chosen one when something quietly releases. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. It is the moment you stop trying to make yourself fit into places that keep rejecting your essence. Not because you are angry, and not because you have given up on life, but because you are finally tired of betraying yourself. This is surrender, but not the kind that collapses. It is the surrender that straightens your spine. You realize that forcing belonging has cost you more than it ever gave you. You see clearly that every attempt to adjust, explain, or prove yourself pulled you further from your center. And in that realization, something softens, the pressure eases, the performance ends. This is when spiritual awakening deepens, not through more effort, but through honesty. Often this turning point comes after isolation, disappointment, or a breaking moment where what you hoped would finally work simply does not. A relationship ends, a role collapses, a dream loses its shape, and in the quiet aftermath, when there is nothing left to perform for, you finally hear yourself again. Not the voice you learned to use to survive, but the one that has always been waiting underneath. This is remembrance, not learning something new, but remembering something ancient about yourself. You remember that you were never meant to blend in. You were meant to stand as yourself without permission, without apology, and without shrinking. The chosen one does not arrive through rebellion. They arrive through authenticity, and authenticity is not loud. It is steady. It does not demand attention. It commands alignment. For the first time, you stop asking what is wrong with you and start asking what is true for you. Your self-identity begins to reorganize around inner alignment instead of external response. You no longer measure yourself by how well you are received. You measure yourself by how honest you feel in your own body. This is calming. This is grounding. This is the exhale you did not know you were holding for years. Authenticity takes courage because it removes the armor of approval. It means you may be misunderstood. It means some people will no longer recognize the version of you they benefited from. But spiritual courage is not about fighting others. It is about refusing to fight yourself. When you stop resisting who you are, your energy returns, your clarity sharpens, your peace deepens. You begin to notice that you are no longer chasing connection. You are allowing resonance. You no longer explain yourself to be accepted. You allow yourself to be seen as you are. And those who are aligned feel it immediately, without persuasion. This is not isolation. This is integrity. The chosen one does not become whole by collecting identities. They become whole by shedding distortions. Each layer you release brings you closer to coherence. Each truth you honor restores your strength. This is why the struggle existed. Not to break you, but to strip away everything that was not you. Circle back to the beginning and hear it with full clarity now. This is a message from God. You were never failing at life. You were waking up inside it. You were called to remember who you are beneath the noise, beneath the expectations, beneath the fear of standing alone. The war was real because the awakening was real. Resistance always rises where truth is forming. Your light is necessary, not later, not when you are perfected. Now as you are, grounded in your truth, you were not meant to disappear into the world. You were meant to meet it as yourself, fully present and fully awake. If this touched your soul, comment 111. Because you know it. You were called. Your divine calling was never about fitting in. It was about standing apart. This is a God's message, and it carries weight because it speaks directly to destiny. You are not imagining the pull you have felt towards something more honest, more aligned, more real. You were called, and what you are beginning to understand now is that your divine calling was never designed to emerge from conformity. It was designed to emerge from clarity, independence, and inner authority. Every chosen one carries a calling that cannot survive inside crowded expectations. It requires space to breathe, silence to sharpen perception, and distance from noise to develop discernment. This is why your path has often felt solitary, Not because you were meant to be isolated forever, but because you were meant to see clearly before you stood with others. Clarity is not learned in echo chambers. It is forged where truth must stand on its own. Leaders, healers, creators, and truth-bearers are often separated early in life. Not because they are superior, and not because they are special in a way that elevates ego, but because their work demands clean sight. Those who guide, restore, build, or reveal must be able to recognize distortion without becoming it. That capacity is developed through distance, through watching instead of absorbing, through questioning instead of inheriting beliefs without examination. You were not kept apart to make you lonely. You were kept apart to make you clear. The chosen one cannot afford borrowed identity. Your divine calling requires that you know what you know because you have tested it within yourself, not because it was handed to you by a group, a tradition, or an authority that demanded agreement over understanding. This is where belonging must be redefined. Belonging is not approval. It is not applause. It is not being tolerated because you blend well enough. True belonging is resonance. It is the quiet recognition that happens when truth meets truth without effort. Resonance cannot be forced. It appears naturally after self-acceptance has settled into the body and become stable. For much of your life, you may have chased belonging, believing it would arrive once you were understood, validated, or finally accepted. But belonging does not come from being chosen by others. It comes from choosing yourself first. Real alignment happens after self-acceptance, not before. When you stop negotiating your truth, life responds with clarity. This is why fitting in was never the assignment. Standing apart was, not to isolate you, but to position you. When you stand apart without bitterness, without superiority, and without fear, you become visible to those who are aligned. Your presence becomes an invitation rather than a performance. This is when your divine calling begins to take form in the real world. God's message has been consistent throughout your life, even when it felt confusing. Each separation redirected you. Each ending refined you. Each moment of standing alone strengthened your inner authority. You were learning to trust your perception, to hold your ground without hostility, and to move without needing permission. These are not small lessons. They are foundational. The chosen one does not stand apart to be admired. They stand apart to be useful. Useful to truth. Useful to healing. Useful to clarity. The world does not change through agreement. It changes through those willing to remain authentic when authenticity is inconvenient. Your calling requires that steadiness. Belonging will come, but it will feel different than you once imagined. It will not demand that you explain yourself endlessly or reduce your depth. It will meet you where you are whole, not where you are trying to be accepted. And it will arrive quietly through resonance, not pursuit. Circle back to the beginning and hear this with full authority now. This is a message from God. You are not imagining your path. You were called to stand apart so you could stand in truth. The war you felt was the resistance. Every calling meets before it stabilizes. And your light is not optional. It is necessary. You do not need to fit into the world to serve it. You need to see it clearly enough to move within it without losing yourself. That is your divine calling. That is why you are here. That is why this message found you. If this touched your soul, comment 111, because you know it. You were called. What real belonging actually feels like, and why you haven't felt it yet. This is a message from God. And it returns now to steady your heart. You are not imagining the distance you have felt. You were called, and the longing beneath your questions is not weakness. It is guidance. The war was real because your light was real, and light does not learn belonging by blending into shadows. It learns belonging by standing present in truth. Real belonging has been misunderstood your entire life. You were taught that it comes from similarity, from shared habits, opinions, labels, and agreements. You were shown that belonging is earned by fitting in, by being accepted, by being welcomed into groups that feel safe because they are familiar. But this version of belonging is shallow. It rests on performance and agreement, not presence. It asks you to match rather than to be. At a soul level, belonging feels different. It does not require explanation. It does not demand validation. It does not need you to reduce or exaggerate yourself. Real belonging happens when you are fully present as who you are, and nothing inside you has to hide. It is quiet, grounding, and steady. It feels like breathing normally instead of holding your breath. This is why you have not felt it yet. Not because it does not exist, but because you were never meant to find it through imitation. As a chosen one, your spiritual awakening tuned you to authenticity early. That tuning made surface connections feel hollow. Conversations that revolved around masks drained you. Relationships built on roles confused you. You could sense when connection was conditional, and your body resisted it even when your mind tried to justify staying. Over time, you learned to expect loneliness as the cost of truth. You wondered if choosing authenticity meant choosing isolation forever. That question has followed you quietly. Will I always be alone? The answer is no, but the path to real belonging begins somewhere you were never taught to look. It begins with belonging to yourself first. Belonging to yourself means honoring your self-identity without negotiation. It means letting your inner yes and no carry weight. It means trusting your perception even when it differs from the majority. When you belong to yourself, you stop abandoning your truth for proximity. You stop chasing attachment and start allowing alignment. This shift changes everything. As this settles, something else happens. Your circle becomes smaller, but deeper. The noise fades and resonance becomes clearer. You may find fewer people, but those few feel familiar in a way that bypasses effort. There is less explaining, less proving, less managing energy. Quality replaces quantity, and peace replaces performance. Chosen ones are not designed for crowds that require conformity. They are designed for connection that honors truth. This is why your connections arrive later and with more intention. It is not delay, it is precision. When alignment replaces attachment, relationships stabilize. They are no longer built on fear of being alone, but on mutual presence. Authenticity becomes the doorway. When you stop shaping yourself to be acceptable, you become recognizable to those who are aligned. Not everyone will understand you, but the ones who do will not need convincing. This is real belonging. It does not cling. It does not demand. It simply meets you where you are. This is also why the fear dissolves. The fear of always being alone loses power when you realize solitude was never the end. It was the passage. It was the space where your self-identity could form without interference. It was where your nervous system could reset to truth. It was where your light could strengthen without being dimmed. Belonging is not something you earn later. It is something you allow after you stop leaving yourself. When you belong to yourself, life responds differently. Encounters feel purposeful. Connections feel calmer. The pressure to fit in fades because you no longer need to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. Circle back to the beginning and hear this clearly now. This is a message from God. You were not meant to feel abandoned. You were meant to become anchored. The war was real because your awakening was real, and your light is necessary not to impress the world, but to meet it honestly. You are not meant to walk this path forever alone. You are meant to walk it whole, and wholeness is the ground where real belonging grows. If this touched your soul, comment 111, because you know it. You were called. Final alignment. Stop trying to fit in and let life meet the real you. This is a message from God, and it closes the circle that brought you here. You are not imagining what you have lived through. You were called. The struggle was real, the resistance was real, and the war you felt was never pointless. It existed because your light is real, and light always meets friction before it finds clarity. Now the truth can be spoken without hesitation. You cannot fit in because you were never designed to. Fitting in was never your failure. It was never your assignment. Every time you tried to disappear into expectations, something inside you refused. Every time you attempted to become smaller, quieter, more agreeable, life interrupted. That was not sabotage. That was protection. You were being guided away from a life that would have required you to abandon yourself in exchange for acceptance. This is where embodiment begins. Not motivation. Not inspiration. Identity. Identity does not ask for permission. It does not wait to be understood. It moves forward rooted in truth. When you stop trying to fit in, you stop negotiating your presence. You walk without shrinking. You speak without over-explaining. You exist without apologizing for your depth, your clarity, or your difference. Let life meet the real you now. Not the adjusted version, not the masked version, not the version that learned how to survive. Let life meet the version of you that is aligned, awake, and steady. This is what final alignment feels like. Calm instead of tension. Certainty instead of confusion. Grounded awareness instead of constant self-questioning. You no longer need to search for where you belong. You no longer need to chase connection or prove your worth. You belong wherever you are fully yourself. The world adjusts to authenticity far more than authenticity adjusts to the world. When you stand in truth, life reorganizes around you, doors open differently, conversations change. The right connections recognize you without effort. This does not mean everyone will understand you. It means you will no longer require understanding to stand. That is inner authority. That is what the journey prepared you for. The chosen one does not arrive loudly. They arrive clearly. They do not demand space. They hold it. Everything you experienced makes sense now. The isolation refined you. The rejection redirected you. The discomfort awakened you. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. This message did not reach you by chance. It arrived in perfect timing because you are ready to stop asking what is wrong with you and start honoring what is true. This is a God's message, delivered exactly when it needed to be. If you feel aligned, if something inside you has settled instead of stirred, comment 777 now. Not to follow a trend, but to mark alignment. To acknowledge recognition. To say yes to what you already know. You are not late. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are awake. And awakened souls do not fit neatly into systems built on fear, imitation, or silence. They stand as reminders of truth. That is why your presence matters. That is why your light is necessary. Walk forward now without explaining yourself, without justifying your path, without shrinking to make others comfortable. You were not created to be digestible. You were created to be real. And real changes things simply by being present. Circle back one final time and hear this clearly. This is a message from God. You were called. The war was real. And it ends here, not with defeat, but with alignment. You do not need to become anything else. You need only to remain who you are. If this touched your soul, comment 111 because you know it. You were called.